So despite this, many believe that pursuing net zero would worsen the cost of living and energy crisis, hitting the poorest in society. So is it right that the UK government spends what the Climate Change Committee estimates to be £1.5 trillion to reach net zero? However, former Energy Ministry Chris Skidmore MP, who is leading a review into finding the quickest and most effective way to reach net zero, believes net zero can make us warmer and richer. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, will net zero make us richer or poorer? I'm joined now in the studio by Stanley Johnson. He's an ambassador for the Conservative Environment Network. So Stanley, net zero, a lot of people complaining about it and saying it's going to make us all really poor. What's your view on it? Is it necessary?
It is inevitable. We've got to do this. We absolutely have to do this. It's the climate crisis, the climate change issue. It confronts us all, and we have to play our part. And it was very good. I was in Birmingham, by the way, and I was very pleased to hear Liz Truss make that clear statement, because honestly, as you probably remember, quite a lot of her speech was focused on growth, growth, growth. And of course, you know, growth is vital, but growth without these environmental steps is not going to work. It will make us, net zero will actually make us richer in so many ways, in the sense we'll be having a survivable planet to be in. And if that isn't being rich, I don't know what is. So we're confronted with it, we're committed to it, and I think we're going to make a success of it.
Do you think that a lot of people are saying, OK, to get net zero, I've got to buy an electric car? That's about 44 grand or so. A lot of people don't have that money. Even the price of heat pumps and things like that, they're very expensive. People can't afford it. So it's almost an unachievable goal. I think a lot of people will be seeing that.
I don't think it is unachievable. If I may just, quote Boris for a moment, if I may, but I'm really quoting the former Prime Minister, who spoke, for example, about the extraordinary capacity these islands have in terms of renewable energy, wind power, wave power. These are real assets which we can do. We don't, of course, have to be 100% energy sufficient in this country. We can import, and we do import, and this is called, the terms of trade. This is called comparative advantage. But we are going to reduce our total emissions along with the rest of the world, and we are, I'm sure, going to get to net zero. And by the way, Alok Sharma is still the president of the COP26. I was in Glasgow. He made a terrific job. He kept them all on the line. He said, this is an achievable target. And I think we'll get there, and we'll get there with the European Union and other major industrialized countries, including China. I've been spending a lot of time.
Where do you think, though, because a lot of countries aren't doing it? I mean, we account for a very small amount of the carbon emissions of the producers who do give out a lot of carbon. And what's the point if nobody else does it, but we're sort of the only ones? Because it doesn't seem like they're not all doing it.
It's simply not the case that we're the only ones. We were part of the European Union. The European Union played a major role in getting the so-called Paris Treaty of December 2015. We are still there. We are moving in lockstep, in fact, in this issue with the European Union. Now, actually, on the case, as you rightly say, there are other countries out there who are big emitters. China is one, India is one. But actually, seeing where they came from, they are making progress. Being fair, we were responsible for quite a lot of the carbon absorption in the atmosphere. Our century and a half of the Industrial Revolution, we used up quite a lot. And it is actually probably quite fair that we might actually make more of a proportional effort than these developing countries do.
OK, well, I mean, you make a good case for it. I hear you. Listen, I want to bring on, let's have a chat and see what, Stanley, thank you for it. Stay right there, because I'm also joined by the director of Net Zero Watch, Benny Peiser. Benny, look, net zero, Stanley makes a good case for it, that apparently if we don't do it, we could find ourselves in even more stuck. What do you think with regard to that, and whether households can actually afford this ideology or this concept?
Well, of course, I heard what Mr. Johnson had to say. It's the same mantra. We've heard this for the last 30 years. And as we can see, we're halfway to net zero, and energy costs are very low now, because as we were promised for the last 20, 30 years, that as we go to net zero, energy costs will come down. It will be very cheap. We will be richer, better off. But this is obviously tongue-in-cheek. The reality is that most European countries will experience the worst winter crisis in living memory. I expect a lot of governments to fall over this energy crisis, not least this current new government. They are prioritizing net zero over the cost of living. They're prioritizing net zero over the cost of energy. And it's no surprise that people won't be able to heat their homes and will blame the government for the utter disaster. So there's no question in my mind that the political elite will stick to net zero. But when people have to heat their homes and pay their bills, they will have a second thought about it.
It has also been signed into law, hasn't it, that it should be reached by 2050. Is that realistic? And I know the Labour Party in this country was saying that they want zero carbon, or I can't remember what their slogan is, but something similar by 2030. I mean, how realistic are these targets in any case? Is it wise to put a number on it like that?
Well, it's obviously completely unrealistic, and I very much doubt any government that continues with these net zero targets will survive contact with reality. This government is unlikely to survive. As I said, any government that prioritizes net zero over the survival of the economy and the well-being of a nation will not survive. So in my view, it is just a question of time when net zero targets will be buried. It might not be this government, it might not be the next government, but net zero and economic growth cannot go hand in hand. You either have to save the economy, you either have to bring down the cost of energy, or you remain a green fanatic for whom net zero is the top priority.
Well, listen, I'm going to bring Stanley into the conversation, Stanley Johnson, to respond to that. Stanley, you've heard what Benny's saying.
Benny, I'm certainly not a green fanatic, but if you talk about the well-being of the nation, as far as I'm concerned, the well-being of the nation does not depend wholly on the rate of economic growth. But I will say you won't get economic growth in any case unless you move firmly on a great range of these environmental issues, and carbon emissions is just one of them. So I am 100% convinced that the people as a whole, just take one thing if I may, there's a proposal out there by Jacob Rees-Mogg to scrap all the EU regulations which derive from EU law, which is still in place in this country. The outcry which has been created by Jacob Rees-Mogg's proposal to scrap EU retained law, including a lot of the emission stuff and the environmental planning stuff, is extraordinary. So I don't believe the people are not going to be behind the government as they stick firmly to their net zero pledges. I'm convinced they will.